This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian. I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
Look, some of us are lazy, alright?
If by lazy you mean wrong.
Prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide whether the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because guess what? This film is lit. Tim Burton adapts one of America's most treasured horror stories. And it turns out pretty much exactly how you'd imagine. It's Sleepy Hollow, and this film is lit.
So before we get started, I just want to plug our partner for this episode, Stories of Your and Yours, or SYY podcast. Host Sean Ennis does fantastic read-alouds of short stories, and he just so happens to be doing The Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
We didn't plan this at all.
We did not.
I don't know.
It was just kismet.
Yeah.
So his episode will be available on October 31st. So if you listen to ours and it interests you, maybe go listen to his.
To expand on that, he actually is going to read the whole story, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, aloud, and it's like a musical radio play where there's sound effects and music. Mm-hmm. It's cool. And
to that end, you could also save hours for after you listen to his episode, if you want to hear the short story first. But between us and Stories of Your and Yours, you guys are getting the whole enchilada this time.
Yep. So let's get into our first segment. Again, just real quick to kind of briefly, if you've been here for Harry Potter, this is more along the lines of what the podcast premise normally is with these segments. So when you're getting into all these segments, this is traditionally what you'll be getting. Our Harry Potter ones are special and slightly different, and we've had a lot of listeners that are here for Harry Potter. They've been getting a lot of downloads, and I hope, and it seems like people are enjoying them. But yes, our main episodes, our normal episodes, are a little different. I have not watched the movie, or I've not read the book in this instance, the story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, that the film Sleepy Hollow from 1999 is based on. I'm going to be coming at it from the angle of the movie making. Katie's going to be representing the story and kind of the comparing, contrasting of the two. And then we have some other fun segments that we do coming up here, some guessing games and that sort of thing. So yeah, strap in if you haven't been here for a normal episode. That's what you're about to get. So we start with our first segment. Let me sum up.
Let me explain. There is too much. Let me sum up.
For this segment, I leave for Katie's summation, so I don't get anything ruined for later on in the podcast, because I'm going to ask questions and that sort of thing, so we don't want to give anything away. So I leave for this part, and then I'll come back and do my summation of the film. Katie's doing the summation of the short story. So,
The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. Ichabod Crane has recently arrived in the small town of Sleepy Hollow to be their new school teacher. He quickly falls head over heels for Katrina Van Tassel, the beautiful daughter of the richest man in town. However, local big man about town, Brom Bones, has also set his sights on Katrina. Ichabod is a superstitious and skittish man, so when Brom weaves a horrifying tale about a local spook, the Headless Horseman, Ichabod has a hard time shaking it from his mind. And on his way home one dark, gloomy night, Ichabod has a bone-chilling run-in with that very monster. Or so it seems.
All right, so that's the summary of the short story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Obviously, there are spoilers abound throughout the podcast, but it kind of goes without saying in this instance. Let me sum up Sleepy Hollow, the film. After a series of decapitations in the small town of Sleepy Hollow, Constable Ichabod Crane is transferred from New York City up to this small hamlet to investigate the murders. As his investigation unfolds, he unearths a web of lies and deception. The eternally skeptical Crane also discovers that magic and undead horsemen actually exist, flipping his worldview on end. His detective work ultimately leads him to pin the crimes on Katrina Van Tassel, daughter of the town's wealthiest businessman, and Crane's love interest. But as he leaves town, he realizes he made a grave mistake, and the true villain is in fact Katrina's stepmother, leading to a raucous final showdown between man, witch, and headless horseman. Kind of is the story that goes on. So that's the book and the movie. Let's get into our first game. Guess who?
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay.
All right, so we have 3 character descriptions.
Okay.
So what this is I will read character descriptions from the original text, and Brian, based on only his movie knowledge, will try to guess who those characters are.
Which character it is translated over. Yeah.
All right. He was tall, but exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves, feet that might have served for shovels, and his whole frame hung loosely together. His head was small and flat at top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snipe nose, so that it looked like a weathercock perched on his spindle neck to tell which way the wind blew.
Okay. One thing I do know from our prequel episode where we discussed the fact that Johnny Depp offered to wear prosthetics to make himself more attractive is that Ichabod Crane is not traditionally a handsome character. They went away from that in the film, but this is not a particularly flattering description of a character. So my first inclination would be, because I'm assuming one of these is going to be Ichabod Crane, but I could be wrong. So that would be my first inclination, would be Ichabod Crane. Also, the lanky seems to strike right from, I think I've read this in like 8th grade or something.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything about it, but that seems to strike right of my memory of sort of him being like a lanky, kind of gangly guy. I'm trying to think from the movie what other characters that could be, and nothing is sticking out to me because I have a feeling a lot of the characters from the movie aren't in the story. I'm trying to think of like main characters from the movie that I think might be crossover, and the only other character I can think of would be if the Horseman mythology is similar, it could be the Horseman himself, but that doesn't. I don't know. I'm gonna go with that's Ichabod Crane.
It is Ichabod Crane.
Okay.
I was really hoping you were going to guess the Horseman, since I specifically read a description of the head.
Oh, yeah. Well, I meant, sorry, when I said the Horseman, I meant, because in the movie we get his backstory and we see him before he loses his head. And so that's what I was thinking, potentially.
She was a blooming lass of fresh 18, plump as a partridge, ripe and melting and rosy-cheeked as one of her father's peaches, and universally famed, not merely for her beauty, but her vast expectations. She was withal a little of a coquette, as might be perceived even in her dress, which was a mixture of ancient and modern fashions, as most suited to set off her charms.
Well, this seems pretty easy. I believe this would be Katrina von Tassel, but I'm going to say, on top of that, authors should stop using the word ripe to describe women. It's fucking gross. Anyways.
I would have to agree with you on that. It is Katrina. We had a similar thing in our Christmas Carol episode.
I don't remember what it was, but it was the same type of thing.
It was something weird, yeah.
I think it's an older,
yeah,
like that, what is this, 18th century or 19th century, early 19th century?
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, it's that, I get it. I mean, it's great. I'm not saying people. Yeah, that's the thing. Most authors probably don't anymore.
Yeah, but there's a context to it, right? There's a historical context to it, but yeah, it's still gross.
And also in this particular instance, it's at least slightly. I could see it as a stylistic choice in the sense that her dad's a peach farmer or something. So there's like a something there but it's still fucking gross.
The comparisons to livestock and like farm. Anytime it's things are ripe. People aren't. You know what I mean? Like that. Yeah. It's a very objectifying descriptor. It is I guess part of it. Yes.
And it's something that you claim as well, like ripe fruit. You pluck it. It's just a lot of gross connotations. And I'm sure all of those were sort of meant and inherent in the use of that description.
Yeah, it's probably
sort of baked into
it's probably not
misogyny
accidental.
of the time. No.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, just gross. Anyway, but yeah, 2 for 2. All right.
All right, so here's our last one. He was broad-shouldered and double-jointed, with short, curly black hair, and a bluff but not unpleasant countenance, having a mingled air of fun and arrogance.
Well, okay, so one other character we know that would be in the story, at least probably, because he's mentioned, would be Katrina's father, Baltus. He has... We don't ever... Do we even see him without a wig in the movie? I guess we do. I don't remember. Because he wears like a white wig. Did she say curly black hair? Short
curly black hair.
Broad-shouldered and arrogance and something, what?
He was broad-shouldered and double-jointed, with short curly black hair, and a bluff but not unpleasant countenance.
What is that? Countenance, do you know?
Countenance, like your demeanor.
Oh, okay.
Having a mingled air of fun and arrogance.
That doesn't really strike me as Baltus. But I can't come up with a better character who I think it would be that would be in the story. The only other person I can think of that it might be... Oh, you know who it could be, and who would probably be in the story, would be Casper Van Dien's character, who I don't remember the name of. Like the other love interest of Katrina Von Tassel. He may be in the story. I could see that, and the arrogance thing kind of makes sense with him. I'm actually going to go with that. I'm going to go with, I don't know his name, but Casper Van Dien's character.
Okay, I think you're thinking of the right person. It's Brom Bones.
It is Brom, yes. Brom, yes. Woo! Yeah, Brom, that was it. I knew it was a B, but all I could think of was Baltus. But yes, Brom,
maybe that was the one you were going to get wrong.
No, I was going to go with, because I was like, who else might be in there? But then the arrogance, because that's like the most defining characteristic of the character in the movie, is he's sort of like the handsome guy, like cool guy in the village, like who's courting the head, the hot rich girl. Yeah, so like that kind of made sense. Well, 3 for 3. That was the toughest one, and like I said, I almost got it wrong, but I nailed it. Maybe you went 3 for 3 as well. Hopefully you played along. Let's move on to... Was that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
So Was That in the Book is our segment that's where I have questions. This is kind of like Muggle Questions during a Harry Potter series where Trevor asks us questions about the books, or about the movies / books. But this is my questions for Katie, based on things as I'm watching the film. A lot of times it's things I'll kind of have a feeling aren't in the movie because they feel like movie ads, but other times it's things I'm legitimately not sure about. So let's go on to my first one. Is Ichabod Crane a detective / constable? He's a constable, but like he's kind of like a detective
he's,
in the film. Is that what he is in the movie?
No.
Or sorry, in the book?
In the book, he is the school teacher.
Okay, that actually rings in my head now. Again, there's probably little things banging around in there, but I don't remember any of them. But yeah, school teacher does, now that you say that, go, yeah, that sounds right. Like if you give me multiple choice of like school teacher, constable, doctor, I might have went with doctor, but I think I would have went with school teacher. All right, so he's not. So then he clearly doesn't get sent to Sleepy Hollow to investigate the murders, which was my next question. I thought that Crane just lived in Sleepy Hollow. Or does he not? Does he just is Ichabod Crane from Sleepy Hollow or live in Sleepy Hollow when the story takes place, or does he get sent there?
He's new to Sleepy Hollow.
Okay, so there is that element to it.
So he when the story opens up, he's just recently moved there.
Okay, that at least makes sense then. Yeah. I could see in the movie why you'd want to show the process of him arriving, kind of sort of that outsider perspective. You know what I mean? That kind of outsider arriving in a new place. Well, then this is clearly, since he's not a constable / detective, my next question was, does Ichabod Crane use magical chemicals to determine how people died?
The answer to that is no.
Does anybody?
No. That was like a really weird...
And what was that? Was my follow-up.
It was so weird because they tried to make him like a man of reason and science.
Yes, but then he does...
But then none of his equipment makes any sense.
Yes, I was very confused by this. When he gets to the first crime that happens after he gets into town, where somebody gets decapitated, he goes and they're investigating the murder scene, and he pulls out his bag of chemicals and whatnot. And,
his forensics bag,
his forensics kit, essentially. And he he drops like or he sprinkles a bunch of powder near the head.
And it like poofs up with smoke.
And then he goes, it was done in one stroke or something like that. And I'm like, that doesn't.
Well, here's the thing that kind of puzzled me, and maybe it's just because this is a Tim Burton joint. Like, it's not like this is set in the Middle Ages. Why not just use or, like, base it on, like, actual forensic tools from that time period?
Yeah, and so the idea is that in the movie is a little bit that Ichabod Crane is sort of like this, he's, like, on the forefront of trying to find new cutting-edge ways to, like, investigate crimes.
Yeah.
And I actually couldn't tell if this was just him bullshitting. I thought that honestly might have been the case, that he made a very reasonable assumption based on what he knew from looking at it, but sort of like did this like sleight of hand to impress the people standing
to make
around.
Them feel like he knew what he was doing.
Look at this! He dumped some chemicals and it made a thing, and now he knows how. Like, because what he says is pretty obvious, that the person's head got cut off in one blow. Like, I think that's what he says, or something like that.
I mean,
and so I just thought it was very strange.
Possibly, but the movie doesn't make that very clear.
No, I agree. And so I was like, well, is he bullshitting? Because there's that whole element, of his. But then also in the movie, it's weird because magic is real.
Right.
So he could be doing some sort of actual, like that could, in the universe of this film, it could just be that somehow there is this chemical that tells you something when you sprinkle it on the ground near a body. I don't know. I don't understand.
The rules of the universe aren't particularly clear.
Not very well defined.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay. And I figured not, because like I said, the thing with him not, I didn't think he was the detective/constable, so I was like, sure, he's probably doesn't do this, but I had to check. Does he have weird markings on his hand in the book?
No.
That's an interesting backstory that I felt like wasn't fully explored in the film.
Yeah.
But we can talk about it. In the film, he has a bunch of dots on the palms of his hands, and we're kind of shown them at one point, and we don't know where they came from. And then eventually, a few scenes later, we realize they're scars from when he was a child, and his mother, and this I had to just parse this all to put this all together kind of from inference. His dad was sort of an abusive asshole, and maybe like the town like judge or something.
Something like that.
And Johnny Depp, Ichabod Crane's mom, was basically like at the heart of a witch hunt. Basically, like her father, and now I don't know if I'd have to watch it again a little more closely to see if it was implied that she was actually doing some sort of witchcraft, or if it was merely...
She was like drawing sigils.
Yeah, like drawing stuff in the dirt.
Yeah, in the dirt, which is what got her accused of witchcraft.
Yes.
And then the dad like shuts her in an
Iron Maiden, and Johnny Depp as a little kid stumbles across it, and he gets scared and stumbles into because his mom's face comes out through the little slot, and then he stumbles and gets his hands on like another torture device, and that's what he gets the scars from. Interesting backstory to give him that doesn't really inform a lot about. What it does inform, I'll give the movie this, is it informs the character to the extent that he's very much, like I said, he wants to. There's a little bit at the beginning of this film about like sort of like going off on this weird side plot about like criminal justice reform, and then it's just sort of abandoned. Like he wants to like make sure we're getting actually guilty people, kind of is what's set up in the first like scene of the film, but then we never really.
Yeah, they never really
come back on that in any way, other than he ultimately has the wrong person, he thinks, and then kind of comes to the realization that he had the wrong person, and oh no. But yeah, it's very, very interesting to give him all that backstory. So I assume we just don't get any of his backstory in the book.
No, I mean not really.
No, well, in terms of like his childhood or anything. No. Yeah. Okay. So, no scars on his hands. Are there witches in this book?
There are not.
Okay. There are several in the movie, which was interesting.
Yeah. What's interesting, though, is that in our prequel episode, I offhand mentioned Cotton Mather.
Yeah.
And his witchcraft writings. He did a lot of, like, the court documents from like witch hunts,
like actual okay, huh?
And in the short story, Ichabod Crane is like a super huge fan.
Oh.
Like, he reads them all the time. Like, he loves reading Cotton Mather. Like,
Interesting.
that's weird.
Yeah, because, in this one, his mother is accused of witchcraft, and now whether or not she actually did any sort of witchcraft is kind of up in the air. My assumption is not really. But we are introduced to two other characters ultimately, these two sisters who are witches of some sort, and Katrina von Tassel even herself does, at least, I don't know if it works or if because it's sort of interesting. This movie kind of plays it a little like loose with whether or not the magic is real, but it is to some extent because the Headless Horseman is a thing that exists,
right?
But like. He eventually, Johnny Depp runs into a witch in the woods who, in like a cave, who does some stuff with a bat and blood and whatnot, and eventually gives him like a vision, right? Doesn't he?
Yeah, it's a place again where the rules of the universe aren't like super clearly defined.
Yeah,
where like we have those two characters who are very clearly doing like actual real magic.
Yes, because she like summons the one who ultimately is the stepmother of Katrina von Tassel,
right.
Summons the Headless Horseman by doing some stuff and getting his skull for one, but then also doing some sort of incantation that basically...
Yeah, and then we have the other witch in the woods who's
her sister, we find out ultimately.
Does witchy things.
Like sort of traditionally witchy things.
And then we have like his mother and Katrina, who the movie shows
she draws
she draws
stuff on the floor, like chalk lines, and not lines, but like chalk.
She draws like a pentagram,
yes.
and his mom draws symbols in the dust by the fireplace.
Yeah.
But we don't ever have any evidence that
those do anything.
Works. Yeah, that does anything.
Yeah, especially because the one time Katrina von Tassel does it in the church, her father immediately dies, and the assumption we're to get, I think, is that she was doing that to protect the church, because we find out ultimately it's like a protection spell.
Yeah.
But immediately her father gets killed afterwards, so it didn't seem to work.
And maybe the distinction we're supposed to draw is like white magic and dark magic. Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe it does work to some extent, but the Headless Horseman is just more powerful, or who knows. But okay, so no witches in the story, just the horseman.
Just the horseman.
Is the horseman the only magical element of the story?
There are other magical elements discussed.
Okay.
Like they talk about like ghosts and hobgoblins.
Right, but we don't ever see any of that stuff in the story necessarily. Okay. But but it is implied that those things maybe do actually exist in the universe or they just mention them.
They talk about them.
Okay. So we don't know for sure. I wouldn't be surprised if they did exist, if a freaking Headless Horseman exists. But. There's not a giant blood tree in the book, is there? There's not a tree that bleeds?
There is not a tree that bleeds. I believe there is a tree that they refer to as like the witch tree.
Okay.
Just because it like looks kind of funny and scary.
So that's probably where they drew the inspiration for that place. Because in the movie, the Headless Horseman emerges he was buried near this big tree that's like dead and wild looking, and he emerges from it whenever he's called, and also retreats back into it, but also the tree bleeds when you cut it.
Yeah, it was kind of
it's gnarly.
Grisly,
yeah, it was kind of cool. There's things I didn't hate this movie. I thought it was kind of fun. It was a fun like Halloween film.
Yeah,
but it's also a little like you can't think about it too much. It's like a little like if you try to search for like. It just doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about it too hard. But if you just kind of sit back and watch it, it's like, it's aesthetic and it's fun.
Yeah.
And like kind of, it's all right. But like, yeah, it's a little under scrutiny. I'm not sure it exactly holds up. So no blood tree, but there is a tree that they probably drew the inspiration from in the book. So one of the main components of the film is that whoever steals the head of the horseman from the grave, because they cut his head off and they put his head in his grave when he was buried, does whoever takes the head command the horseman?
That never comes up.
Okay. So no, it doesn't.
No.
it's tough to talk about because I don't know what happens in the story. So like it does. Is the horseman is under anybody's control that we know of, or is it just doing its own thing?
He's just doing his own
thing. Is it
thing.
just claiming heads?
Well, he's looking for heads.
Okay.
Potentially.
Okay. Yeah. So this is one of those very loosely inspired by type of films where they like took the idea and they're like, let's fucking go crazy with it. Well, it's fine. Are there any exploding windmills? So wait, hold on. Is his head missing in the book?
Yeah, he is headless.
So he wasn't. What I mean by that is he wasn't buried with his. We don't. I guess maybe we don't know if he was like buried with his head.
Right. We don't know that.
We don't know because we probably don't get the backstory of the horseman.
Well, like a little bit, but not like we do in the movie.
In the movie, which we'll talk about eventually, but which was probably my biggest problem with the film was the choice for who played the horseman. It's very jarring and takes you out of the film immensely. Are there any exploding windmills in this book?
There are not any exploding windmills. It's a shame. It would have made the story a lot more exciting.
A giant set piece of a windmill. Is there a windmill mentioned that you recall? I mean, we don't have to go through it page by page.
I don't recall there being
but
a
windmill
windmill mentioned.
Maybe that was something. I mean, there probably was a windmill
There
somewhere.
probably was. It's like a little Dutch settler town, so there's probably a windmill.
You had a mill, but it's still, I was just, okay, because there's a big set piece where they're climbing the mill and they jump outside and then it explodes. And at first I was like, why did that explode? But now I can buy it because I can. I can buy it because it is a mill. I'm assuming it's a mill that's grinding grain of some sort of flour, and it's actually it's actually a big problem with silos and stuff. If you get too much flour / whatever in the air, it aerosolizes and can cause wicked explosions. So it's actually not outlandish that. Because he does, like, throw a lantern down the bottom and some stuff catches fire.
I like the implication that, like, as a man of science, he would know that.
Yeah, I agree. And because it seems a little ridiculous because I don't think the movie does a particularly good job of explaining that's what happened. And if you didn't know that, you'd be like, why did that just explode?
It was just super flammable.
Yeah, because it straight up explodes. It doesn't catch fire. It explodes. Yeah. And so I was like, and then I was like, I do remember that's a thing that, like, there's a big issue with, like, static electricity and fire in grain silos or, like, mills and that sort of thing, because it can cause explosions from basically just rapid combustion of aerosol powder, basically. So, believable, potentially. But it's not in the book.
Right.
And finally, does Crane save the day by football throwing the headless horseman's head or a head to the horseman? How does he conquer him in the book? How does Crane save the day, or does he die? I don't remember. Okay,
so in the short story, whether or not the headless horseman is real is ambiguous.
Oh, I was hoping that was where the movie was going to go, honestly.
The kind of conclusion is that he probably isn't.
Okay.
But it is left a little bit open to interpretation. So there isn't any real need for, like, witches or curses or blood trees or exploding windmills. Right. Crane in the short story does not defeat the headless horseman. We don't know what happened to him at the end. Okay. He's disappeared.
Crane does?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but we don't know, dependent on whether or not the headless horseman is real.
Okay.
Right? Was he carried away to hell by the headless horseman? Or did he get scared by something or someone and he was so embarrassed that he skipped town?
Ah. Okay. I can see. Now, see, that's interesting because I was actually hoping that ultimately that was where the movie was going to go. I'm a big fan of those.
I thought the movie was going to go that way, and no.
And it doesn't. I was hoping the movie was going to go. I'm always a fan of these stories anyways, because that's the kind of person I am. But when you set up a world where a lot of people think there's some magical devil about, but then it turns out just to be people. And now they kind of try to get the best of both worlds in this one by having the headless horseman be a real magical undead entity, but it is controlled and used for very kind of human, quote, for money, basically, just to get money. So, like, because I was hoping it was going to be, oh, there's this horseman and is killing these people, but ultimately it's not, it's somebody dressed up as a horseman.
That's not the headless horseman. That's the gardener.
I'm a Scooby-Doo fan. I was hoping it was going to be an episode of Scooby-Doo, but like with Tim Burton on it. Like I was like, that would have been fun to me. I don't hate what they did. I think because you can also do a fun magical like fantasy story about an actual, and so the direction they went with it, I think works overall, and it's kind of fun in its own like spooky Halloween way. But I would have liked, and I think there's more interesting things you can do with characters if it is just people, if it is not anything magical going on. I also think that works really well in your setup with Ichabod Crane as like this eternally skeptical person who's, when he gets there, he doesn't really buy into the whole headless horseman thing, but he very quickly is disillusioned to the fact that, oh, there actually is a freaking headless, because he runs into the tree and sees it burst out of the tree. Like clearly there's something crazy going on here. This isn't a person dressed up in a headless horseman costume. But I think it would have been interesting to see the sort of angle of him as a man of science, and with this whole town be like, no, it's actually this mythical headless horseman killing people, and he's just like constantly trying to convince them, and he has to piece together the puzzle to show them, look, it's actually this guy, like the Scooby-Doo. I really just would have loved the Scooby, like headless horseman Scooby-Doo, but like
I bet there is
with
a
the
headless
aesthetic
horseman Scooby-Doo.
I'm sure there is, guaranteed there is. But with the aesthetic of Tim Burton and sort of the same stuff that they do, but just kind of none of the actual magical stuff.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me that Tim Burton took it in that direction.
Yeah, again, I think it works and it's fine, but it was just kind of...
It's fine. Their book and the movie are doing two different things.
Yes, and I kind of think, it sounds like from what your description, I think I would have preferred just kind of going the direction of the book where it's never really clear, or it's clear that it wasn't actually a headless horseman, but that it could be a little more vague on whether even that would have been fun in the movie if you weren't sure at the end whether or not it was actually the person. Maybe you figure out that this is who was behind it all for whatever reason, but whether or not it was actually a headless horseman is kind of left ambiguous. Would have been fun too, but whatever. All right, that's all I had for Was That in the Book. I don't have a Lost in Adaptation because there was nothing really... The only things I was confused about were things that I was pretty sure were just in the movie, and like you weren't going to be able to give me any extra from the book. So I don't really have a Lost in Adaptation, which is where, if you're watching along... This is also the other half of the Muggle questions, where if you're watching a movie and you're like, what does that mean? Well, I don't understand what that is. And then the book hopefully has maybe some more perspective.
Yeah, the book has some clarification.
Yes, but I didn't really have any questions in that regard this time. So we're going to skip Lost in Adaptation this week and go right on to Better in the Book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
Okay, so before I get started on Better in the Book and subsequently Better in the Movie, I have a little bit of a disclaimer of sorts.
Okay.
And this is stuff we've kind of touched on already, but this is one of those cases where the book and the movie are just incredibly different beasts.
Yeah.
And this often happens when we work with short stories, where it's very clear that the screenwriters took the basic concept, and in this case, a couple of the characters, and just kind of ran away with it.
Yeah.
So I only have a couple of things because, when they are so different and they're trying to accomplish different things, it's hard to quantify what's better and what's worse.
Worse, yeah.
So
take the specific word "better" with a bit of...
Yeah, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt this time. All right, so Better in the Book. Brom Bones in the movie looks so incredibly well-bred.
Oh, Casper Van Dien's character in the film.
Like, he looks like a gentleman, or like he's rich.
Yes,
or...
the vibe you get is that, yes, he's the Gaston of the town, basically, from the film.
I mean, I get, and he's not the Gaston in the book, but I pictured him more as like and the way he behaves and the way he's described in the story, he comes off as more of like handsome but rough around the edges, kind of like farm boy type of character.
Yeah. Right, so maybe more like, maybe more like Wesley from Princess Bride, or...
Like, if Wesley and Gaston had a baby, that baby would be Brom Bones.
Okay. Write that fanfic. Connect those three worlds. Wouldn't be that hard, I don't think.
But in the movie, he just looks like a snotty rich guy, and we don't really get to know him.
No,
all
we don't
that
get
much.
to know him. But yeah, he does definitely kind of just come across as, I don't know. Yeah, he definitely just kind of comes across as. I think the bigger problem is we just don't really get much from him. We don't see him very much. So he just shows up at the beginning to kind of be a jerk, and then we know he's kind of in love with.
Yeah,
Katrina,
and it's
then
interesting that it's interesting to me that the movie even bothered with him.
I'm not surprised. They kind of add that sort of the romantic tension between him and Johnny Depp and Katrina. Again, it's not in there that much because we're doing a lot of other stuff, but I can see why they would include that.
It's just so little of it. Whereas in the book, he's basically like the primary antagonist.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we consider Ichabod our protagonist, then he's going head to head with Brom Bones.
Yeah, because that's not in the movie at all. They there's an antagonistic scene early, and then he kind of just Brom dies halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
But him and Ichabod fight the horsemen together.
Yeah.
And then Brom just dies.
Odd, strange.
Yeah. Does Brom die in the book?
He does not.
Okay.
He actually gets the girl.
Well, there you go.
So
it's very different.
Yeah. So one thing that the movie kept that I liked was this aspect of Ichabod Crane being like secretly scared of everything. Yeah. Like in the book, he's real superstitious. Mm-hmm. Not so much in the movie.
No, it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
Just to some extent. I mean, he's not like I call him the eternal skeptic, but I don't know if that's the case. But he's definitely a bit more leans towards the not believing and all that kind of stuff initially.
And he's real superstitious in the book, and he's also real like scared and skittish, but kind of tries to like hide it.
They captured that in the movie for sure, because he's definitely in the squeamish nature of him.
One thing that was in the book that I wish that they would have kept, it wouldn't have made any sense, I guess, but it would have been funny. So one of Ichabod Crane's most prominent character traits in the book is that he's a bottomless pit. He just like eats everything. Like he just eats and eats and I don't know. I just think it would have been funny to have like Johnny Depp just be constantly eating.
They would have had to cast Brad Pitt, and then it would have been perfect because Brad Pitt eats in every scene in every movie that he's in. So that would have been good. But
all right. So my last thing for Better in the Book is a big thing that we've talked about already, but that's fine. So the movie chose to have the Headless Horseman be real and literal, and that's fine. I don't think it's necessarily a better or worse story, but I can see the argument for that as a more compelling film, with it being a visual medium. Yeah. However, I do enjoy the kind of ambiguous ending of the short story. You get a sense of what probably happened. Yeah. And what probably happened was that Brom Bones was dressed up as the Headless Horseman and chased Ichabod out of town. Yeah. So that he didn't have to compete with him for Katrina.
Right, which we get like a scene of that in the movie, but where Brom is dressed up as the horseman.
But you don't really know for sure that that's what happened. And I think ambiguous is a fun way to end a spooky story.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think because it's trite, but the unknown is often scarier than the known.
Like, ooh, what happened? Yeah. Is he real? He could be behind you right now. All right, so that's all I had for Better in the Book.
Okay.
So we can move on.
Better in the Movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
Again, this was really hard.
Yeah.
They're very, very different stories. I think Ichabod Crane as a detective makes sense if you're fleshing the story out.
Yeah.
His being a school teacher is pretty unrelated to the Headless Horseman element either which way.
Yeah, it doesn't really.
Yeah, so detective/constable, that's an interesting change.
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah,
I thought that was fun in the movie.
It works thematically, I guess.
Yeah, it gives him a reason to be kind of investigating what's going on if he's essentially a detective sent up there to investigate these murders that have been happening.
Right. If they had kept him as the school teacher and kept everything else the same as the movie, he would be one nosy school teacher.
Yeah. I guess I should have asked this, and was that in the book? Does anybody actually die in the book?
No.
Are there any any
No.
Okay, that's interesting.
I mean, there's the ambiguous thing about what happened to Ichabod.
Right, but there aren't like a series of murders.
Oh, no.
Okay. I should have asked
and
that.
Actually,
that's a big change.
That's my next point on here. I think the idea of there having been actual murders is interesting. Because in the book, the Headless Horseman is basically like local lore.
Right, it's just a myth. It's
a story that locals tell to each other. But the idea of like there having been incidents within recent memory even is interesting, I think.
Yeah. I like the I think I would have. We'll talk about it. I actually have an idea for what I would have liked when we get to general discussion. So stick around. I have what is in my opinion, would be the perfect Sleepy Hollow film.
We'll just get Tim Burton on the phone up in here.
No, I don't want Tim Burton. I want somebody else. But
okay,
a lot of other people. But I have a pitch for a Sleepy Hollow film that I think would be really interesting. And they kind of got close with the Tim Burton one, but they didn't go the direction I wish they would have.
All right,
we'll talk about it.
So stay tuned for that. I thought it was interesting that we had a more fleshed out backstory for the Headless Horseman.
Yeah.
He is, in the book, he is a Hessian, I think they say. A German soldier hired by the British during the Revolutionary War. So we have like that kind of minimal backstory in the book. But I think the fleshed out one was...
In the film?
It's interesting.
Yeah, we'll talk about it here because it makes about as much sense as anywhere else. Casting Christopher Walken as the Headless Horseman pre-headlessness was a terrible mistake, in my opinion. He's just not imposing to me.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't strike me when I watch Christopher Walken, and he's so, maybe a little less so in 99, but I don't think that's not infinitely less so. It's very Christopher Walken. Like, you just see Christopher Walken. Two, I think the design of the character in the film is just kind of silly looking in general with the teeth. The teeth ground to spikes and the weird black hair that's like all feathered and crazy. And he just... But on top of that, to me, Christopher Walken doesn't scream, and when you watch him walk around, he doesn't strike me as like, that's a guy, as like a feared warrior, which is like the whole premise of who the Horseman was in the film.
I think that the trouble is that he's not a particularly physically imposing.
No, like he's kind of tall, but he's not... He just doesn't, and I guess it's like, the roles I've seen him in.
I don't necessarily believe that he could lob somebody's head off with one sword swing.
Yeah, that's it. That's the thing. It's like he doesn't strike me as like, this is the guy that this is the warrior, the swordsman who all of these people feared, and he was like this super imposing presence going around hunting down soldiers or American soldiers or whatever. Just doesn't like. I'm just like when I see Christopher Walken, I'm just like, that guy, not that guy. I don't think they could have picked a worse person if they had tried.
I'm sure they could have picked a worse person.
I'm sure they could have if they found, but like that was the worst part of the movie for me. Honestly, was just because it's kind of super important to like establishing the mythos of this character. It's the super serious setup. We get it very early in the movie. Right.
Well, and especially if you're going to go with, this is real.
This is real, and it's this scary, horrifying thing.
We need to believe that he's capable of that.
Yes, we need to... The reason you're scared of the Horseman isn't because it's this spooky thing that we don't know if it does or doesn't exist. It's very much you're scared of it because it's real, and he could go around and hunts people down and cuts their heads off all the time, and it's like terrifying. Like that's kind of the angle they went. And every time I see, and especially because without a head, it's all I can imagine is Christopher Walken. Like something about seeing it then after I know it's Christopher Walken, I'm still imagining Christopher Walken it almost makes it goofier when I see it without a head walk, like stumbling around. When I know that was Christopher Walken's head on top of those shoulders, I imagine like, oh wow, 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 like every time he's like stumbling around, or walking around as the Headless Horseman, all I can hear is like Christopher Walken's voice being goofy, and it just is so not scary.
Oh
It's so weird. It's just the worst for me. It was the worst possible casting, and it took me out of the movie so much. Even though I liked a lot else about like this, like I said, the aesthetic of the film, and kind of just overall, I thought it worked okay. The walk-in thing was a nightmare for me. Anyways,
I thought giving Ichabod a little more backstory was good.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe that backstory needed a little.
It needed a little more fleshing.
A little more fleshing. But, you know, if you're going to expand on a story, you need backstory for your main character, so that's good.
And I think it ties in well with his change to your first better in the movie, him being a detective constable, and the whole backstory with his mom and being kind of wrongfully accused.
And it's at least an attempt to explain why he is the way he is.
Yeah.
We mentioned it earlier. I thought it was interesting that they played out the end of the short story there for a minute when Brom is dressed as the Headless Horseman.
Yeah,
and
Brom pranks him once, basically.
Pranked.
Prank war.
And throws a pumpkin at him. That's literally how the story ends.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if this was a closer adaptation, it would stop there.
It was end there.
Yeah.
Ichabod runs away.
Although it raises some interesting questions about why Brom has a Headless Horseman contraption.
Yeah.
Because it is like a contraption.
He has it's like a crown essentially that he wears with like a head mount, and it's a whole thing he had to put together.
Because now that I'm thinking about it, why wouldn't that make Ichabod suspicious of him? Like, I feel like I would have gone to arrest him immediately
after he hears him laughing, and he realizes, that wasn't the actual horseman.
Like, you have the costume, dude.
Yeah, because this is before he runs into the bleeding tree and knows it's like, he should have just went over there and been like, oh, so you're the guy killing all these people. You're under arrest. Yeah, that's weird.
All right, movie. I liked that they gave Ichabod a friend.
The kid.
Yeah.
That was a fun, interesting
nice.
change.
Yeah,
is that because the kid whose parents get killed, or at least his mom's already been dead, but his dad gets killed, so he's like an orphan now, and Ichabod kind of takes him as his steward or whatever.
I like that the movie gave Katrina a personality and agency. She is pretty much just an object in the short story, which, I mean, they're all tropes in the short story. None of them are fully fleshed out three-dimensional characters. But Katrina probably a little more so than the others in the short story has basically no agency. Yeah. So that was nice.
Yeah, she gets a little bit in the movie to do. Especially with having her kind of doing magic of maybe or maybe not doing magic of some sort. Or at least trying to do magic. All right. Well, that was better in the movie. We're going to do our general discussion where I'm going to pitch a much better version of Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And then we're going to get to our final verdict.
Why are Tim Burton's period pieces always gray washed?
I don't know how many period pieces he's done, but his films are always very. They have an aesthetic. He goes for a very specific choice with how he color grades his films. I was thinking specifically the way that this looked reminded me very strongly of Sweeney Todd. Yes, and even to some degree Corpse Bride. Yeah, and I think the idea behind that would be because Sweeney Todd this is set in New England, but Sweeney Todd is set in England, right? Yeah, like London. So I think part of it is he's trying to. It's just again look at Tim Burton. That's just what he is. But like he's like every goth emo like kid ever, but like talented, and he. I think part of it is it's a very specific choice because he wants to capture sort of the dreariness, especially in these type of films, in Sweeney Todd and in Sleepy Hollow. It's a visual way to depict the dreary nature of London or of this little kind of weird hamlet in New England, to where it's kind of just gray and rainy and cold and gross. They're usually during like, fall or winter.
Yeah.
It's just sort of everything's gray. And then that's sort of just sets the aesthetic of, and is the backdrop for his stories to play out in front of. It's just sort of a gray scale.
With a splash of red.
Yeah.
Every now and then.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too, is that it's the contrast then of when he does choose to bring color in.
Yeah.
It's more striking against the...
Right.
Yeah. Against the gray background, so...
I don't know, I thought it was interesting to me because a lot of his stuff looks like that, and then a lot of his stuff is like...
way over the top colorful.
Yeah, like cranked up to 1,000,000 colorful.
Yeah, like Alice in Wonderland or...
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah. He has kind of two speeds.
Yeah.
I mean, because another one you can put in the gray back, or the gray pool is to some extent is but this one goes both ways, which is really interesting. Is
I think I know what you're
Edward
going to say.
Scissorhands,
Yeah.
where half of it is super kind of gray, but then the other half, when you get into suburbia, is like the bubblegum.
So there's a contrast there.
Yeah, and I think that it's just an aesthetic choice, and it's one of the things I'll say about it is that it's I like it at times, but it's definitely easy to sort of be tired of it. Not tired of it, but so much as like, is it that interesting if you do it in every movie? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I get what you're going for when you do it, and I'm not saying it's ineffective, but if you do that in every movie, is that you paint with a different palette or something? You know what I mean? Like, kind of do something else.
Yeah, I mean, to me,
and again, he does different things.
I get it. I get why he does it. Like, I get what it's supposed to do for us as the viewer.
Yeah.
To me, I'm gonna throw some shade at Tim Burton here. Maybe it's just because I have seen him and others do it so often. It seems like very student film.
It's not. That's the thing. It's a very obvious way to sort of establish the character of your setting is to make it a certain palette.
Yeah.
To be like, look, we're in New England. It's gray. Get it? Because it's cold, and in this instance, it's kind of creepy, and he's the outsider and he doesn't belong here, and it's off-putting and it's dreary, and like it's this, But yeah, you can do that. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And one of the ways that's kind of easy and obvious is just make everything gray. I don't really have a problem with it sometimes, but I know exactly what you're saying.
Okay. All right. In the very beginning, when we were first going into Sleepy Hollow, there was a shot of a scarecrow with a pumpkin on its head, and there was a fire lit inside the pumpkin. Why would you light a scarecrow on? That's the worst idea I've ever heard of. In the middle of your crop?
Yeah, terrible idea. Terrible idea.
You are asking for trouble, sir.
Again, a lot of times Tim Burton does things for the aesthetic, quote unquote, and not for you to think about, per se.
Well, I will think about them. Can't stop me. I just have like a bunch of random notes.
Let's talk about this. Here's my pitch for the better version of this movie. Okay. One thing I realized right away really early, this movie is basically, and it's one of my favorite movies of all time, this movie is basically Hot Fuzz.
Yes.
Kind of. And that's my pitch for the better version of this movie, is to just make it Hot Fuzz. But make it Sleepy Hollow, but have the story, because it sets up like Hot Fuzz, where it's this upstart detective and they send him to this little town to deal with because they don't really want to deal with him in the big city because he's like kind of annoying. Like he's like, they're like, we don't want to deal with your, like, because in the movie, in Sleepy Hollow, he's got all these big ideas about how we need to change the justice system and like this sort of thing. In Hot Fuzz, it's because he's just making them all look bad because he's too good of a cop.
It's like, you're too much.
Just go. You're going to send you to this tiny hamlet and you're just going to stay out there. And then ultimately, crime breaks out there. I think what would be cool is the exact setup they had in this movie. And then when he gets there, and this would kind of follow more along with the book, these murders are happening everybody in the town is like, no, it's this headless horseman. It's that, it's the story that they've had in their neighborhood for a long time. And he's like sort of figuring it out. And he's like, no, it's this and this. And maybe he gets it wrong a few times and accuses the wrong people, kind of like in Hot Fuzz, or he doesn't really accuse the wrong people, but he doesn't have it all sorted out exactly right. But ultimately, it is just maybe a handful of people in the village, which is kind of the misdirect they make you think in this movie. I just wish they had followed through with it, and it ends up being like Hot Fuzz, where it's like a handful of people in the town are just like killing people to keep secrets and like and now it's not Hot Fuzz, and they're not killing people to preserve the crime, that their pristine town and make it so that it's the world's best town, but that they're killing people for some nefarious reason. Maybe it is something plot to do with money, like they set up in the thing where they're going to try to get money from somebody's will, and then they have to kill these people. But just have it ultimately be that it is this group of 4 or 5 people, or however many, that are all kind of separately pretending to be the horsemen, because they even kind of do this in Hot Fuzz, where there's one person in a hood who's killing people. That's the horseman, but it's never the same person, we find out. He thinks it's this guy. He thinks that, Ichabod Crane's like, oh, it's Brom or whatever, but it's not Brom. Maybe it was Brom one time, but a different time it wasn't Brom, it was somebody else, and then it gets confused. Basically Hot Fuzz, but change why they're killing people, change that reason, make it not quite as funny as Hot Fuzz, or as funny. I mean, do whatever you want. And but basically just Hot Fuzz, I think, would be because then it's actually closer to the book to some extent in terms, and you can kind of let it ambiguous, but it's also like I said, they kind of almost got there with this movie. They're kind of going that direction, and then to me it's just like, but actually headless, but
actually witches,
but actually headless. Christopher Walken is killing everybody. So I don't know. I think they could have. I think just make Hot Fuzz, but make it Sleepy Hollow would be an amazing film. I think it would be really fun. But Sleepy Hot Fuzz would be my pitch for for how to make
better than
the Legend
Fuzzy
of Sleepy
Hollow.
Yeah, definitely.
So wait, now who do you want to direct it?
Oh, who do I want to direct it? I mean, the easy answer is Edgar Wright, and I would never say no to Edgar Wright directing any film ever, because he is the most talented director in the game today. Go ahead and at me. But no, I wouldn't say necessarily. I wouldn't want Tim Burton, but I think he could do it. You know who might be fun? I'm trying. There's a lot of different people you could do. You know what would be really fun, because I think he could do it, and it would be. Here's the thing, because I think it could be almost as funny as a Hot Fuzz film, and I think he could do the action, he could do the sort of mystery, and it would not, and have it, and I can pick somebody that's not Edgar Wright to do it. Taika Waititi would be my person to direct this film. Yeah. He's worked somewhat with What We Did in the Shadows. Sort of, there's some elements of What We Do in the Shadows that could translate to sort of the humor with like these weird old timey people. You know what I mean? And then mix that with sort of being able to direct a bigger budget type of film like Thor Ragnarok, or some of the other Hunt for the. That's not really a big budget, but Taika Waititi, my choice. Rewrite Sleepy Hollow, but literally follow the plot points almost point for point of Hot Fuzz, and then change all the jokes and everything. All right, I think it's a brilliant. I think that's how you remake. Comes out with this now. I think that's how you remake Legend of Sleepy Hollow. You thought of it first. I think that's how you do it. We have the evidence. I think that's how you do it. I think it would be brilliant. But
I'm so glad that we got to have Dumbledore explain things to us. Still,
oh god, we can't get away from it. Even when we're taking a break from Harry Potter, we still have freaking Dumbledore stand there and exposit things about witches at us or whatever. It's not witches, but about.
He tells us the
horseman tale.
Horseman backstory.
Yeah, I was like, oh great, Dumbledore standing in front of a fireplace telling us what happened,
telling us everything we need to know.
Boy, this is like Michael Gambon's calling in life, apparently.
But speaking of the Headless Horseman's backstory, though, probably my favorite part of this movie. So when the Headless Horseman, before he gets beheaded, he's running away from the soldiers. and he's going through the trees and he happens upon these two creepy little girls.
Yes.
Who we find out later are the witches, but we don't know that at this point.
Yeah.
And he sees them, they're like gathering sticks for firewood.
Yeah.
And he makes a motion at them. And this little girl looks him dead in the eyes and snaps the stick.
Fucking no chill.
Shush me again, bitch.
It's pretty amazing. It is pretty amazing. She has absolutely no time for him. She's like, yeah, you can tell me what to do. Break the stick. Yeah, it's pretty great. We watch a kid get murdered in this movie, but we don't see it. I thought that was weird. I wasn't expecting that, and because they don't. I feel like they set it up so that he goes in and he kills the midwife and the midwife's husband in the town, and then their son is hiding under the floorboards, and the horseman comes back and grabs and pulls the kid out of the floorboards, and then it cuts outside. Yeah, and he's like putting something in a bag, and I'm like, did he just put that whole kid in a bag? But then that's when the fight breaks out between Brom and Ichabod and the horsemen. So we never see what happened. But I guess we're to assume that he cut that kid's head off. Yeah, we never see that kid again.
And when Katrina's stepmother, then at the end, like who turns out to be the main villain is monologuing, she tells us that the midwife found out about one of her secrets. Yeah. And told her husband in front of their kid. Yeah. So which I guess the implication being that now she has to kill all three of them. Yeah. Even though the kid was like 2 years old and probably
clearly
didn't
had
know
no idea what they were talking about or anything. He's just a little kid.
Like, sure, kill that kid.
Yeah. That kid gets
I mean, you're evil, so.
This is one of the other problems with the movie, I thought, in general, was that there's never really a reason, and it's kind of it's for the conceit of the film, but there's not really a reason in the movie for whatever the stepmother's name is to use the horsemen to kill everybody, because it's a great idea if the horseman does all the killings and she does that to kind of keep her her name out of it, so she doesn't have, so nobody has any suspicion of her being behind any of this stuff. But we also have all these flashbacks at the end of the movie where she's explaining her whole plan, where we watch literally her just walk around and murder people with axes several times. Yeah. She kills that maid girl or whatever, and she kills her sister witch in the woods by herself with an axe.
Well, and here's the other thing too that I didn't get. So she is having the horsemen kill all these people because she wants to basically inherit all of the town's money. Yes. Like, she's managed to finagle all of these last will and testaments. So
just one, I thought, but yeah.
Well, I thought she did something with like the other families so that the money was going to be funneled here.
It was the one family that died. Their money was going to go to, they had it so that their will sent their money to Baltus. Mm-hmm. What was it?
Von Tassel.
Von Tassel. And then he ends up dying. So then the money goes to Katrina, the daughter, but then if she's dead, it goes to the stepwife or the stepmother.
Regardless. So her plan is to eventually legally inherit all of this money, right?
From all these people dying.
Now that
literally
she's
like dozens of people killed.
So why would she fake her own death? How the fuck can she inherit all this money if she's dead?
That's a good question.
It's a really good question.
Because, she absolutely pretends to be dead. Yeah. Maybe, okay, I'll give it this. Maybe the idea is that she takes this will, but then because the town, she would have to kill the whole town or something. Because I'm like, okay, well, maybe that's problematic. Well, not like quote unquote, not hashtag problematic, but just like story wise problematic. But I'm sure it's probably problematic in some way. Because my thought was, well, maybe she takes the will and somehow has her birth certificate, some sort of identification that is like, that's who I am. So it's that maybe she takes it to a different town and like goes to like somebody to execute the will, because she's dead. Well, she's not, but she's according to all the people, she's dead.
Yeah.
And did she get the money yet? That we didn't see her ever get the money.
Because at that point,
because Katrina's still alive.
She hasn't even tried to kill Katrina yet. When she,
I would have to rewatch that scene to see if that makes any sense. If there was a line of dialogue that we missed that somehow,
I don't know, the whole
connects those ends.
Ending.
Yeah,
seemed. I wanted to talk about it in a minute, but also in this movie was a shot of a cardinal sitting on a tree branch, and holy shit, it was the fakest bird I've ever seen in my life.
I did not notice.
Oh
that.
my god. It was the fakest fake bird. But also I thought it was interesting that they used cardinals. That's not in the book. Because in some folklore traditions, the sight of a cardinal means that a deceased loved one is checking in on you. Oh. So I thought that was potentially an interesting nod. Or maybe Tim Burton just wanted the color red. Who knows?
Yeah, probably that. Probably just wanted something red. It was like cardinals. The only other note I had was that two things. One, we both laughed out loud when Ichabod Crane chucks the skull to the Headless Horseman. So the big final showdown happens, and the stepmother's there, and Katrina's there, and there's a stagecoach chase, and all kinds of nonsense happens. Ultimately, they get to the tree. Ichabod Crane gets the skull from the stepmother and throws it to the Headless Horseman to give it back to him, so then maybe he'll stop because he's following the stepmother's commands because she has his head basically. But the moment where the way it happens on screen, where he throws the skull and then the horseman catches it, is the stupidest look. It just looks so silly. There's no better way to describe it.
Another kind of issue that I had with this movie overall was that I felt like the tone was kind of uneven. A lot of the time it was serious, kind of, and scary and atmospheric, and then other times you were football throwing the skull to the Headless Horseman, or the witch's eyes pop out of her head like a cartoon.
Yeah,
and
it definitely it was Tim Burton's tone, which is it rides that line, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Overall, I thought it worked pretty well, but that one particular moment where she throws the skull just really stuck out to me as okay, that's yep.
And then he bites her lips off?
I don't know. He does have a great moment, and I thought this was really cool, where they do a reverse Indiana Jones head melt, which was kind of gnarly, where all of his tissue and stuff grows back, and it looks really cool. And I was like, that's pretty sweet, because it's literally the exact opposite of when everybody's heads melt at the end of the first Indiana Jones. It's also just originally, I believe it was just called Indiana Jones, and then they added I believe the subtitle was added once other ones came out, but I could be wrong.
Kind of like Star Wars.
Yeah, I think. Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's what it was. It was not called Indiana Jones. It was called Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then this is like a Rambo First Blood thing. When they made a sequel, they switched it to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And then since then, Raiders of the Lost Ark has kind of been culturally, I don't even know if they officially changed it, but it's culturally known as Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. But it's just called Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I think I'm good on notes, unless you have anything else you wanted to talk about.
Well, I'll say this here. I technically have this in my final verdict section, but I think it fits better here. All right, so for what it is, I enjoyed the movie.
Yeah, me too.
Like I said, they kind of took the concept and just ran with it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they did a bad job. A lot of the changes they made make sense, given that they wanted the Headless Horseman to definitely be real.
Be real, yeah.
I think my biggest complaint overall was that I thought the plot line with the witches and Katrina's stepmother, I thought it was kind of convoluted and clumsily done.
I agree, it was a little clumsy.
I get that they needed some reason for the Headless Horseman to be running about slashing people's heads off, but to me, it was kind of hard to follow.
Yeah, it was a little tough to follow,
and
I agree.
It resulted in, 1, a very tiresome villain monologue.
Yes.
And 2, an ending that came out of nowhere.
Yeah. I agree.
Like, to me, it almost felt like maybe they were rewrites late in the game,
It
and they
does
were
feel
like,
like that.
we'll just do this.
Yeah, and then we'll just have her monologue and explain everything.
Yeah.
It definitely felt a little bit like that. But yeah, because I had the same thing where I'm like, this generally works. It's like we said earlier, if you don't think about it too hard,
Yeah.
you just kind of like sit and enjoy it and eat popcorn and like, woo, Halloween, like, woo. Then yeah, it works fine. But yeah, it's not the tightest script that's ever been.
Once you start thinking about it even a little, it's kind of like,
Yeah, it's not the world's tightest script, that's for sure. All right, let's do it. Final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
All right. Both the short story and the movie are good and entertaining for what they are. In the past, for adapted short stories, I've typically gone with the movie because I enjoyed the way that the movie fleshed out the story and or the characters. Now, while that's not necessarily untrue of this movie, I'm not really comfortable awarding better status because of those things. For one, the movie didn't really flesh out the plot so much as take it in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
And the movie did flesh out the characters, but I don't consider that a failing of the short story because they didn't need fleshing out within that medium.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to judge because they are so fundamentally different, but I'm going to go with the short story, mostly on the grounds that when it really is neck and neck like this, I feel like it's most fair to concede to the original.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be a movie without the book, so
the book's better. Eat it. That's a fair.
But again, comparing two things that are so fundamentally different is like deciding if an apple is better or worse than an orange.
Yeah.
You can't really compare the two objectively in any way. So in the end, it just comes down to personal taste. So if you guys disagree with me, feel free to do that.
Yeah.
But luckily, this is a short story. So if you want to pass your own judgment, that's pretty easy to do. It is in the public domain, so you can find it online in its entirety. Or you can listen to our friends' Stories of Yore and Your, SYY podcast. Again, their Legend of Sleepy Hollow episode drops on October 31st, and you'll be able to hear that original story in its entirety.
Well, there you go. Tally one more up for the written word. Before we go, as always, you can find us on every single social media platform that exists. That's not true, but most of them. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads. We have a subreddit, reddit.com/r/this film is lit. Pretty much everything main social media platforms. Next time we're doing the prequel to the 34th episode, I believe is the number.
Yes.
And that will be our preview of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince.
Yes.
And we'll do something else in there with our learning things segment. I'm not sure exactly what yet, but it'll be our prequel up. Or do we know?
Yeah. No, I don't know yet. No.
Okay. So yeah.
We're gonna power through the rest of Harry Potter.
Yes, three more episodes on Harry Potter.
Yeah, we're gonna divide Deathly Hallows
into the two films.
Yeah. And give each of them their own episode because holy Lord, that would be a long podcast.
Yes.
We're gonna power through the rest of that. So this has been our last break.
Yes.
In Harry Potter.
And we'll be wrapping it up and then moving on to new and different and interesting things.
By the time we're done with Harry Potter, we will be ready to start talking about Christmas.
Christmas stuff. It's that time of the year again. So there you go. That is what is on the docket for the very foreseeable future, the near future. Until next time. Oh, also go rate us on stuff. Review us. Gosh darn it. iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you download us, give us 5 stars and share us around if you're liking our podcasts and recommend us to people. If not, then don't. That's fine too. Until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, everybody else, keep reading books, keep watching movies, and keep being awesome.